I'd like to point attention to an interesting slant which I've noticed amongst certain traditionalist scholars, that being the libertarian slant amongst them. The libertarian slant can be identified by the emphasis on the public private distinction and the fact that ideally a Muslim government would not interfere in the private lives of the people. For example, take the following article by Abu Amina Elias on his website. He mentions in it the story of the second caliph of Islam, Umar, where he attempts to spy on a person drinking in the privacy of his home, to which he is reprimanded by that person, and he is told that spying is a sin, hence he should not spy on him. At that point, the second caliph Umar gets up and leaves. This shows that a person is not punished for sins in his private lives, and thus the mentioning of this story indicates the importance of it in the kind of polemical scene between different religions, but more importantly to emphasize the point that in theory a Muslim government would not interfere in the private lives of the people. Another example of this is where Abu Amina Elias distinguishes between minor apostasy and major apostasy. Minor apostasy is characterized as that which is held by a person in his heart, his own private convictions, and thus he is not punished for that. Whereas major apostasy is coupled with public violence, and hence he is punished for that. There's a distinction made between private beliefs and public actions. There are a few important assumptions that are made here. One of them being the fact that God does not necessarily require a government to interfere in the private lives of the people. It maintains the importance of the private-public distinction, and it also emphasizes free will and liberty as a theological point, and this translates into a governmental or societal setting where the government cannot force people into certain actions and furthermore cannot punish them for private actions. Proponents of this more libertarian stance, this more libertarian slant amongst certain traditionalists, use certain verses of the Quranic text, for example, that there is no compulsion in the religion, or that whoever wishes to let him believe and whoever wishes to let him disbelieve, or other verses such as that if God willed, then all of those who are on earth would have believed. They also may use certain incidents from the life of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, where he did not punish people for certain sins and actions in their private lives, or he emphasized tolerance or sort of religious harmony or pluralism between different groups. Why this is so unique is that many traditionalists have used this libertarian art angle and this public-private distinction to explain and solve certain objections that are raised to the hudud, the Islamic penal code. It furthermore answers objections to the Islamic legal corpus as a whole, because there's often a objection that the Islamic legal code or the Islamic political code would be totalitarian or authoritarian in nature. But such a libertarian angle, as shined upon by certain traditionalists, would emphasize, in fact, the nature of the caliphate, not necessarily as a libertarian institution, as a completely liberal institution, not as a Muslim political system as being completely liberal, but emphasizing that it would protect certain private freedoms and it would definitely protect the free will of the individual in a societal context. For example, take the argument posed by Asrar Rashid in his book Islam Answers Atheism in response to the objection of certain new atheists such as Lawrence Krauss on certain punishments within the Islamic legal code. He points out that such actions would not be punished if they were done privately, but rather they are only punished if done publicly. He also mentions in his book Intellectual Intifada that the caliphate, the Muslim political system, so to speak, as he idealizes, would not be a totalitarian, Orwellian sort of technocratic state. Of course, he is linked to the Western tradition and he is well versed in the Western tradition. And with this backdrop in mind, he does emphasize the importance of a caliphate system which would protect individual liberty, as the emphasis on individual liberty is quite heavy within the Western tradition. He also mentions how individual freedom and liberty in one's private life has to be protected against the forces of an totalitarian and authoritative intrusive government. One question that may arise is that is such a development, is such an intellectual development, aka this libertarian approach to certain Islamic legal rules, or although some may argue that such a development is foreign to Islamic jurisprudence, although the wording or terminology used may be as a result of interaction with the Western political tradition, in and of itself it's not necessarily a completely alien concept. The Islamic legal code does emphasize the importance of maintaining the privacy of people's homes, the importance of maintaining people's private rights and private liberties, just like most pre-modern ideologies may do. In fact, there's an interesting argument among certain libertarian circles that certain pre-modern systems of political thinking, such as a monarchy, would be better suited to protecting individual liberty than modern systems such as a democracy, such as modern liberal democracy, let's say. Hence, even though the Muslim political system will not be a completely liberal institution, it would protect to a large degree a general form of liberty and a general kind of private individual freedom. And this is the kind of libertarian slant which, whilst being influenced by the Western philosophical and political tradition, is ultimately a kind of organic development which certain traditionalists have developed and have used to solve certain objections raised to the Islamic political code.